Hi, I'm Murray Walker and you're listening to Beyond the Grid.
Hi everyone, Tom Clarkson here, welcoming you to another edition of Beyond the Grid, presented by Bose Quiet Comfort 35.2 wireless headphones. Now, the upcoming Chinese Grand Prix is the 1000th race in the history of Formula One. So how best for Beyond the Grid to reflect all of that history and passion? Well, there's only one man for the job.
Third light, fourth light, fifth light. Action! Ed Villeneuve's lost it. Incredible! My goodness! The third leader in 2 laps. Oh! My goodness! I have never seen that before. This is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through. Out! Oh my goodness! This is fantastic. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race. Damon Hill wins the Japanese Grand Prix, and I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
The iconic tones of Murray Walker, my guest this week. For several generations of fans, he remains the voice of Formula One. His commentaries for the BBC and ITV were broadcast across the English-speaking world, and he became more famous than many of the drivers on the grid. Murray did countless F1 commentaries during the 50s and 60s, but it was only in 1978 that the BBC committed to Formula One. And with that, the popularity of the sport and of Murray himself grew exponentially. There was a genuine sadness from every corner of the sport when he retired after the US Grand Prix in 2001. But his legend endures. In fact, you can hear many of his greatest commentaries in full via F1 TV. Murray is now 95 and he's less mobile than he used to be, but as you're about to find out, his brain is still pin sharp. I went to his home in the New Forest after the Bahrain Grand Prix for a catch-up. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Well, Murray, welcome to Beyond the Grid. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show. First of all, how are you?
I'm all right, Tom. I'm old and doddery and I've got things wrong with me that old people get, but basically I'm okay. Firing on 5 cylinders anyway.
5 out of 10.
Oh yeah, 5 out of 6.
Well, Murray, you look great, and it's such a pleasure to come here to your home to have a chat. And now, listen, are you a podcast fan?
Tom, I paused because I was just racking my brains to find the right answer. I don't really know what a podcast is. I don't think I've ever consciously listened to one, and to the extent that I have, I just assumed it was a sort of extended radio interview, which is what it is, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're embarking on right here.
Right.
Now, Murray, how up to speed are you with modern day, current 2019 Formula One?
Well, I like to think I'm right, or almost right up to speed. Not nearly as up to speed as I was, Tom, when you and I worked together, because, I'm not part of it now. And as you know, when you're part of it, you're talking to people all the time from different walks of life, team principals, drivers, sponsors, everybody you can think of, about nothing else but Formula One. And to you and to me at that time, there wasn't anything else other than Formula One, because you live in a sort of bubble and nothing else matters, Brexit and things like that.
Let's not go down that route, Murray.
No, we're not going down the Brexit route, I promise you. So I'm out of it, but to the extent that I'm out of it, I've tried to keep up as much as I can. I watch television, I read papers, I read magazines, and I talk to people. So I'm fairly up to speed.
Did you watch the Bahrain Grand Prix?
I watched every second of the Bahrain Grand Prix, yeah, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I felt so sorry for Leclerc, because to come into Formula One as he has, and get into Ferrari as he has, and to lead the race as he was doing, so close to the end, and have something happen to him, was, I hesitate to use the word tragic, but it was very sad. The BBC always used to say to me, Tom, you mustn't use the words tragic, and you mustn't use the word disaster. They said, it's not a disaster if somebody retires from Formula One. it's not tragic if somebody's engine blows up. It's tragic if 50 people are killed in an earthquake in Japan or something like that. But even taking that into account, I think it's almost tragic that Leclerc had the problem that he had.
He's a very impressive young man. He's only 21, and he said all the right things after the race. And he did. Let's face it. He blew Vettel away at the weekend.
Yeah, and he's talking in a foreign language.
He speaks plenty of them. I think it's Italian,
French,
well, English.
I'm consumed with admiration and respect for anybody that can do that.
And Murray, did you know that Leclerc's mother is David Coulthard's hairdresser?
No, really?
Yes.
How does that happen? Monaco, I suppose. Yes. Yeah.
Next time you see David on the telly and you think his hair's looking great, you know where it came from.
Right.
Now, Murray, let's talk a little bit about you and your career, first of all. Was F1 a hobby or a job for you?
Tom, I actually started talking about what today is Formula One before Formula One existed in 1949. If you can think back that far, probably your mother's told you about it.
A little bit before my time.
When Baron Tullow de Graffenried won the British Grand Prix in a Maserati. You have to take into account the fact that I was born into a motorsport atmosphere because my father was a very successful professional racing motorcyclist. And he raced from before I was born until I was 12 years old. So I was either going to love motorsport or loathe it. And I loved it and still do. And the answer to your question is Formula One is almost a passion with me. Always has been. Not to the extent that motorcycle racing is, I have to tell you. Rather traitorously tell you. But it's very, very special.
Did you ever want to race yourself?
Tom, I'm surprised at you asking a question like that.
Well, I know you did do a bit.
Because I did actually race motorcycles.
I did know that.
And I retired at the height of my success after I had won a 250cc heat at Brands Hatch, when Brands Hatch was a grass track which ran anti-clockwise. And it was the time when John Surtees was a youngster racing with his father, Jack, and Jack rode the bike and John Surtees rode in the sidecar. And then I took up enduros on motorcycles, 6-day motorcycle events.
Where did they take place?
Pardon?
Where did they take place, these enduros? In the UK?
I rode in the International 6 Days trial in Llandrindod, Wales. It was based, and we went charging about all over Wales. And the Scottish 6 Days trial, I rode in that. Got awards in both of them. And I was fairly reasonable, Tom. I was fair to good club standard. But I knew that I was never going to be as good as my father. I started off with delusions of grandeur that I was really going to show the old man how a motorcycle ought to be ridden. And I very rapidly discovered that I wasn't. And you know what they say, those that can do and those that can't talk about it. So I started talking about it in 1949, got an audition at Goodwood. And talked about the Reg Parnell winning a heat there in his Maserati. And then it all grew like topsy, but I had a full-time job in the advertising business. If, as I'm sure you do, you know that PAL dog food prolongs active life, PAL, prolongs active life.
If you coined that?
If you know that your cat lives long, stays young and lives longer on daily kitty cat, if you know that opal fruits are made to make your mouth water.
Does a Mars a day help you work, rest and play?
I was the account executive and the account director on the Mars business, but I didn't actually think of that. I wish I had. But a trill makes budgies bounce with health. How does that grab you?
All of the
So
above,
a lot
Murray.
of trill.
Well, look, I want to come on to your ad career, but did you miss the bikes when you stopped? Did you miss the adrenaline, the competitive side of it?
When I stopped racing, no, not really, because, well, you know, Tom, if you're behind a microphone, you get a lot of adrenaline flowing, and if you are talking to literally millions of people, as I was in the BBC days, and the BBC was the sole broadcaster. It's very different now. There's umpteen different organisations broadcasting Formula one way or another. But when I started off, and for quite a long time, the BBC was the only Formula One broadcaster. So if you were going to listen to it, you listened to me because you hadn't got the option. So when I stopped riding bikes, I stopped because I really knew I wasn't good enough to get to the top, which was what I wanted.
Did you worry about the dangers of bike racing?
No, you don't, do you? It's something that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to you. And I didn't really do it long enough or at a high enough level to start thinking like that.
So then the ad world beckons. A lot of people listening to this, I think that commentating was your job, but actually...
Oh, it's my hobby.
Exactly.
It's my hobby.
The job, the 9 to 5 is what you just described.
9 to 5. Well, not much more than 9 to 5, because in the agency business, you lose a lot of business, so you inevitably have to replace it with new business. So I was doing a lot of new business presentations as well as working on my own accounts, and that meant weekend work. But it was the what we now call motocross scrambling, that really got me going, because I'd been doing a lot of stuff on radio for BBC and public address, and then RTV came to me and said they wanted me to work on scrambling, as it was then called, and it took off like a rocket.
So when did the I mean, you've said already that, you know,
when did I switch to cars?
Yes, 1949.
Yeah, well,
Silverstone,
I had been doing a lot of stuff like the British Touring Car Championship, Formula Ford, Formula 3. BBC wasn't doing any, or hardly any, Formula One coverage. They would do Monaco, they would do the British Grand Prix and the Italian Grand Prix, and that was about it. And then in 1976, a chap called James Hunt won the championship, and Britain suddenly became aware of Formula One because of the glamorous image, the Playboy image, the devil-may-care image that James Hunt had. And the BBC decided they were going to do Formula One, and at that time their natural commentator was Raymond Baxter. And Raymond Baxter couldn't do it because, for a variety of reasons I won't bore you with, and they asked me to do it, and that was 1978, the Mario Andretti, Ronnie Peterson year. And then it just grew from that, and I carried on doing the job and the broadcasting for 4 years until 1982, and then in 1982 I was 60 years old. I retired from the advertising business, and my broadcasting career started.
At the age of 60.
At the age of 60, yes.
And now, excuse me while I interrupt myself, more of the unique memories of Murray Walker in just a minute. First of all, I wanted to say it's been great to see that so many of you have been taking my advice and snapping up a Harry's razor. Our listeners must have faces as smooth as a Formula One slick tyre. And if you haven't, then here's a little reminder. Harry's have a special offer for Beyond the Grid listeners, offering a trial set for just £3.95. All you have to do is go to harrys.com/F1 podcast. These trial sets are fantastic. and the perfect way to test out if Harry's is right for you. Just enter your details online and you'll get a neat little package delivered to your door with all that you need to get going. There's going to be a weighted ergonomic handle, ensuring maximum comfort and grip while you shave, and 5 precision-engineered blades with a lubricating strip and a trimmer blade. Harry's are also going to throw in a foaming shave gel which feels really good on your skin, and a handy little travel blade cover to protect your kit that just slots straight on. All that for just £3.95. High quality blades for half the price of other brands out there. Get started shaving with Harry's today by claiming your trial set for just £3.95. Support our podcast and you get a trial set delivered to you, including a razor handle, 5-blade cartridge, foaming shave gel, and travel blade cover by going to harrys.com/F1 podcast. That's harrys.com/F1 podcast. You had lots of people in the commentary box with you, but there were 2 legendary partnerships, weren't there? There was James Hunt and Martin Brundle. Let's talk about James first. Tell us about why that worked and what it was like to work with James.
It's difficult to know where to start with James because he was a unique character, Tom. He didn't care about what anybody thought. He was an extrovert. He was a showman. He drank too much, he smoked too much, he womanized like there was no tomorrow.
Sounds like you're very similar.
He could be the most arrogant, overbearing, objectionable person you've ever met in your life, and frequently was. But all the time there was a really decent, cheerful, friendly, nice person hiding inside. And when he retired from broadcasting, the nice chap took over. Sorry, when he retired from racing, the nice chap took over. But I had some very difficult times with James. I had some very good times with James.
What would trigger?
To tell you what he was like, I used to you rush about the paddock all the time, beavering away, talking to people, talking intensely to drivers, to principals, to tyre technicians, to anybody who would talk to me about anything to do with Formula One, in the hope that some of it would stick for the commentary, while James would languidly sit in the Marlborough motorhome and everybody went to him. And I would get to the commentary box an hour before the race began. James would get to the commentary box maybe 5 minutes before the race began. And to wind me up, he would often say, "Who's in pole position, Murray?" I used to stand up to commentate, literally on the balls of my feet with adrenaline pouring out of me by the bucketful. James would sit in a sort of sullen heap beside me and gesture for the microphone when he wanted it, or I would give it to him when I wanted him to say something. And there were times when he hadn't really got very much to say, but when he had got something to say, it was really worth listening to. Why did it work? I was old enough to be his father, Tom. And as you will gather, James did a lot of things and said a lot of things that I didn't approve of, and vice versa, probably. But I think it was probably partly because of that. Because we grew to be tolerant of each other, I used to want the microphone. I was so excited and wanting to impart everything that I had learned and was watching that I really didn't want anybody else in the box with me. I didn't really want James Hunt. I was quite happy to do it all by myself. So James had that aspect to put up with. I had other aspects to put up with. James was incredibly outspoken. The trouble with Jarrier, he's a French Wally, always has been and always will be. Used to say the most outrageous things and get away with it. And the public loved him. And on one occasion, he didn't turn up at all, the Belgian Grand Prix one year. And we were frantically getting retired drivers to come to the commentary box to talk to me about what it was like. James formed up afterwards and said he was sorry he hadn't been there, but he was in bed with a stomach complaint. It was the first time I'd ever heard 2 Belgian nurses called a stomach complaint.
Would you say
But that was James.
that sounds very true to form from what I've heard about him? But would you say you were friends by the end?
Yeah, definitely. By the end,
yeah.
we were.
Yeah.
Not really at the beginning. We were reluctant partners from my point of view. James obviously wanted to do it, but no, we were all right at the end.
And what impact did his death?
We were all right at the end, provided, oh dear, this is going to sound very arrogant, provided I was tolerant enough to put up with some of James's excesses. And some of James's excesses were really excessive. And he had the most fearsome temper. God, he frightened the life out of anybody when he was having one of his tirades. But there you go. The important thing is, Tom, that it worked from the public point of view, and I suspect that it was the contrast of personalities, my talking like my trousers were on fire, as Clive James used to say, and James, the relaxed public school expert, because he had been there and done it at the highest level.
What impact did his death have on you personally?
Well, it obviously had an enormous impact, because I'd been working with him for 13 years, 16 times a year, 4 days at a time, and if you multiply 16 by 13 by 4, you get a very big number. So I greatly missed the partnership. James was replaced with Jonathan Palmer, who did an excellent job. But then ITV took over, and Martin Brundle had come in at Mark Wilkin, the producer's behest, at several of the broadcasts one year, and shown himself to be very good. So ITV then used him, and he was the best bloke I ever worked with by a long chalk.
Why?
Because he's a nice person, because he's predictable, because he's got a good sense of humour, because he's been there and done that at the highest possible level. World Sports Car Champion, winner of Le Mans, drove for 8 Formula One teams, finished on every step of the podium except first, had beaten Schumacher. And he was one of those rare individuals, a top sportsman, top of his craft, who could actually talk entertainingly and interestingly about it, as he still does, bless him.
He does. And the grid walk, of course, was something that
Yes.
he started, wasn't it?
No, it isn't. It's the grid walk Murray Walker started.
I said the wrong thing there. When did you
I'll
first do a
spare you
grid
your
walk?
embarrassment,
Yes,
Tom.
I'm blushing, Murray.
But
when did you start?
It happened years earlier in South Africa. And I said to the BBC, look, I've got an idea. Why don't you give me a microphone and a team on a Steadicam, the people who walk backwards, giving you the pictures, and I will just walk down the pit lane and talk to whoever I see that I want to talk to, and it will be unprompted, and they won't be expecting me. With one exception, I primed Joe Ramirez of McLaren that I was going to come to him. And I walked down the pit lane, and the last person I talked to, as he leapt out of his car and crossed the track to come to the pit area, was Tom Walkinshaw. And it was brilliantly successful, because this hadn't been done before, where you were actually in the pit lane and you were actually talking, not recorded, but talking live to the people that the fans wanted to hear from and idolised, was something entirely new. And then it sort of fizzled out somehow until Martin revived it and does it brilliantly well.
Martin revived it. Martin, if you're listening, you learn everything from Murray. Now, Murray, believe it or not, China is the 1,000th race in Formula One history. So I thought it was perhaps a good, perhaps a rigorous thing to do would be just to ask you for a few of your favourites. So if I was to say, during those 1,000 races that go back to the first ever Grand Prix, 13th of May, 1950, Silverstone, World Championship Grand Prix. In that time, favourite driver?
Fangio.
I knew you were going to say that. Why Fangio ahead of a Senna or a Schumacher or a Jim Clark?
Tom, people say who's the greatest, and I always say to them, look, I can't answer that question because you can't compare drivers of one generation with drivers of another generation when they were driving different cars at different circuits to different rules. You just have to make a subjective judgment, and you can try to justify it, but if someone thinks passionately about someone else, it's very difficult to challenge them. Why Fangio? Well, he was unique and is still unique in that he won 5 world championships, 4 of them with different constructors, with Maserati, with Ferrari, with Mercedes-Benz and with Alfa Romeo. Now, admittedly, he did that because he was astute enough to know that he was the best and that he could therefore drive the best car, and he therefore used to just have yearly contracts, and at the end of the year he would decide which constructor he was going to drive for next. But he was a great person as well. It wasn't just that he was a great driver. He was a humble individual who'd come from very ordinary circumstances at Balcarce in Argentina, and he came across to Europe and conquered it in a 4CLT Maserati, and then got all these works drives. And he was absolutely supreme. The only person who really could hold a candle to him at that time was Stirling Moss, the greatest driver never to have won the World Championship, and much greater than a lot of the ones who did.
Let's talk about your personal relationships with drivers. I'm thinking Mansell, I'm thinking Senna. I mean, can you just tell us, in terms of your personal relationships, who you got on best with and why?
People seem to think, Tom, that people in your position and my position are continually hobnobbing, having lunch with, having dinner with, having drinks with, going on holiday with, and generally being super duper friends with top drivers. You know that isn't the case. Nowadays, you have to make an appointment about a fortnight before when you want to talk to a driver. In my day, it was a lot easier because Formula One wasn't as professional and wasn't as far-reaching and wasn't as big a worldwide sport as it is now. I've got a feeling I'm not answering your question, actually.
No, you are. You are, because you're just explaining that perhaps you weren't as close to these drivers as people perceived you to be.
So,
but still, you had a relationship with Nigel.
My big exception is I like to think that I was pretty close, if not very close, to most of the English drivers, particularly my mate Nigel Mansell. Not the easiest person in the world to get on with for a lot of people, but I always found him extremely kind and helpful, and I've stayed at his home in Florida when he lived there. I've stayed at his home in the Isle of Man when he lived there, and we came up through Formula One together, and he's a good old boy. They called him Il Leone in Italy when he drove for Ferrari, and Il Leone means the lion, and it was a very good description of Nigel because he is and was lion-hearted, and I got on extremely well with him. I got on extremely well with David Coulthard.
Was Nigel a generous man? Because some of the people he's worked with say that he was very hard work. I'm talking team people. Your experiences of him, was he a charming man over a dinner table, or how did you find him on a personal one-to-one basis?
Well, on a personal one-to-one basis, I got on with him extremely well. But you have to bear in mind that with all of these people, Tom, I was representing the BBC, and the BBC was mighty important and still is mighty important. And not many of them were going to be unpleasant to me because of that, and irrespective of what we were like on a personal chemistry level. But quite apart from that, I got on with. But Nigel was, and I don't suppose he's changed, in many ways a difficult person to get on with. Very thin-skinned, took offence very easily.
Did you ever criticise him? Get under that skin?
I can only remember one. Nigel used to be very aware of what everything said to him. I think he had a network of friends and informers who came to him and said, "You know, you read so-and-so, Nigel." And Nigel came up to me once and he said, "What's this you've been saying about me being boring?" I said, "Nigel, would I say that you of all people were boring?" "Well, that's what I said," he said. So, I mean, that was the only... I didn't. I was present at an occasion, 2 occasions with Nigel, when we had a young developing producer at the BBC, a chap called Ken Burton, very nice bloke. And he was supervising an interview that Nigel and I were to do. And he gets the camera all lined up, and then he says to Nigel, "Nigel, would you mind taking your cap off?" And Nigel said, "I'm paid £1 million to wear this cap. No, I won't." So Ken Burton says to the cameraman, "No, avoid the cap, avoid the cap." So we did the interview, and it was a back-to-back situation. The next weekend, we were at another Grand Prix, and Ken Burton's got the cameras lined up, and he says to Nigel, I couldn't believe my eyes, ears, Tom, "Would you mind taking your cap off, Nigel?" "I can't believe it," says Nigel, and stormed off.
Oh, stormed off?
Stormed off, yeah. And so I gave it 5 minutes, and I went to him. I said, "Look, Nigel," I had a chat with him, and we came back and we did the interview. But I had a similar situation, or not dissimilar, with Damon Hill in his championship year, when he was working unbelievably hard. He was doing 6 hours in the gym every day. And I sat down to do an interview with him at Portugal. And he was looking very peaky, very thin. His cheeks were sunken and his eyes were looking haunted, for want of a better description. And I said, "Damon, are you all right? You're not overdoing it, are you?" "What do you say that for?" he said, and stormed off. He stormed off.
Oh, Damon.
So I gave him 5 minutes, and then I went and said, "Look, Damon, I've obviously offended you, and I'm sorry. I was perfectly unintended." He said, "It's all right, Murray." He said, "I'm okay now." But he said, "Just before you, I had another chap interviewing me, and he said, 'What would you give to have your father back for just 1 hour?'" Now, Damon's father was Graham Hill, double world champion, killed in an air crash, dramatically, adversely affected Damon's life. And to ask a question like that at the best of times would have been ill-judged, but in the nervous state that Damon was in with the World Championship in the offing, it was lighting the blue touch paper and standing clear.
They're under so much pressure, these guys, aren't they? But I mean, let's talk about Damon, because, of course, I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Yeah.
It's one of the sort of iconic lines of Murray Walker as he won the championship in Japan.
People accuse me, Tom, of thinking of smart-ass things to say and writing them on the commentary box wall so that I could slot them into the commentary at the appropriate moment. Not true. You're standing there with adrenaline pouring out of you. You're having to interpret the pictures that the viewer is looking at, and you're looking at the same pictures as they are, so that they know more about and are hopefully interested and entertained in what they're seeing. And I was very much involved with Damon. I had been aware of him when he was racing motorcycles at Brands Hatch, and became the Brands Hatch 350cc champion. And then through his mother, Betty, and to a lesser extent through his father, Graham, I was aware of him in his youth, and then he switched to cars. So when Graham was killed and the Hill family, Betty the mother and Damon the son and the two daughters, Bridget and Samantha, were cast into the wilderness because Graham Hill's insurance was invalidated for a variety of reasons, and they were on very hard times. So I'd lived all through this, aware of what had happened. And when Damon crossed the line to win the World Championship, after losing it to Schumacher in dubious circumstances in 1994, it really did all well up inside me, and quite spontaneously I said, I've got to stop now, I've got a lump in my throat, because I had genuinely got a lump in my throat.
Do you stay in touch with Damon now?
I hear from him occasionally and see him occasionally, yes. Top man.
Top man.
Absolutely top man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd second that. But
decent, kind, humble, jolly good driver, good sense of humour. When he started doing his television work, he was one of two or three people, and basically pundits. And I used to sit watching the box, and Damon was standing there, not really saying anything, but listening to the others. And I was saying to myself, get in there, Damon, you're a pundit, you're supposed to be saying something. And of course now he's changed beyond recognition, and he's jolly good at taking the initiative and asking the right questions, and genuinely being thoroughly entertaining from the point of view of someone who's not only been there and done that, but done it and become world champion.
We'll get back to Murray in a moment. But before we go any further, I wanted to say a huge thank you from all of us at F1, Bose, and the Beyond the Grid team. Your support and messages since we launched the podcast have been fantastic, and we've had a record start to our second series. It's humbling to hear how much you're all enjoying these interviews all around the world. So keep on sharing your thoughts with us using the F1 Beyond the Grid hashtag. Noise off, focus on continues to be our motto for Series 2, and that's why, as we celebrate F1's 1000th race, we have a special treat in store. 10 lucky listeners are going to be the recipients of their very own pair of Bose QC352 wireless headphones. If you get your name called out, then rest in the knowledge that soon you'll be receiving a special package which will allow you to experience the superb 20 hours battery life that these headphones can provide. You can lose yourself in the capabilities of the world-class noise reduction technology that Bose is renowned for, and you can test out the Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant functions all for yourself. I'll be announcing 5 listeners' names now, and the final 5 at the end of my chat with Murray. So here we go. Thank you to Nick Walker, who said Carlos Sainz was a phenomenal interview and that the humility and professionalism of Carlos is just what McLaren needs for the long term. Awesome guy, despite his indifference to Milton Keynes. Well, Nick, yeah, indeed. Now, number 2, Grokul on Twitter, who shared that he was listening to the Luca de Montezemolo episode while driving to work and was constantly checking his mirrors for honking cars. Well, we'll keep the honks to a minimum in future, Grokul. Sarah Jones, sorry to hear that you've been hobbling around after your biking accident, but I'm glad you enjoyed the chat with Günther Steiner, and I hope it helped distract you from some of your pain. get better soon. And Daniel Johnson loved listening to the Iceman Kimi Räikkönen and said that he's a breath of fresh air. Well, I can confirm, Daniel, that the interview was as much fun as it sounded. And finally, a huge thank you to Michael Gould, who set up a Twitter account to say the following. What an epic 2 episodes of Beyond the Grid, serious insights from Luca and DC. Series 2 is a step above Series 1. Keep it up, Tom. Well, we will, as long as you keep listening. More details on the QC35-2s can be found at bose.com. But first, let's get back to more incredible insights from the great Murray Walker. For all, of course, Damon is intrinsically linked to Senna, Ayrton Senna. And Murray, one thing that always struck me is when circumstances got very difficult, a driver was killed, for example, you always said the right thing. You got the tone right. And I'm thinking specifically of Imola 94 when we lost Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna. Just your memories of that weekend and how difficult it was to say the right thing.
Very difficult indeed, Tom. There again, because I had been doing it as long as I had been doing it, and because I was doing Formula 2 as well, and Formula 3 and Formula 4 and all the other things, I used to catch these drivers right at the beginning of their careers. And I did with Ayrton Senna in 1982 when he was winning everything in Formula Ford. So I was been aware of his career, and very much so, and interviewed him umpteen times. And I'm going to be slightly long-winded. Does that matter from the point of view?
We have plenty. The microphone's yours.
In the winter of 1993, I had got out some tapes I have done of the iconic year 1983 in Formula 3, when Senna and Martin Brundle were battling for the title. Senna won it, but Martin won a lot of the races and only just failed to win it himself. And I realised at that time I had been talking about Ayrton Senna. And I had become sloppy, like a lot of people, and was now calling him Ayrton Senna. So I resolved in 1994 that I would use his correct pronunciation of his Christian name. So in the first race of the year, which was Aida in Japan, if I remember correctly.
That was the second. No, first race was Interlagos, I think.
Sorry, the first race was Interlagos.
Home race for Senna, yeah.
And Senna spun out and Schumacher won. The second race was at Aida, and Senna got turfed off by either Häkkinen or Larini. I can't remember which it was. So we're now at San Marino, the first European race. And I sat down with Senna and said, well, Ayrton, I said, 2 races down, you haven't got any points, Schumacher's got 20. What's to do? What happened to Ayrton? He said.
Did he say that?
I said, how on earth do you know about that? You're in the car when I'm talking. Oh, he said, I keep in touch, Murray. And that was a typical example of how Senna had got his finger in every pie, right up to the hilt, and knew a hell of a lot of what was going on. Now, is Senna the greatest of all time? Not to me, he's not. A brilliant, charismatic, superb person in so many ways, but so utterly determined to win, do what may and cost what it may, that he did some highly reputable things, like crowding Prost at Imola, like taking Prost off in Japan. I didn't admire him.
You think he overstepped them up?
I mean,
on those occasions he
did
but,
overspend the miles.
Yeah.
What he did in Japan was absolutely outrageous.
Yeah. Did you say that to him? Did you ever say that to him?
No, I didn't. But in Australia, the end of the season it was then, Jackie Stewart was doing an interview with Senna before me. And Jackie was absolutely brilliant. He just took Senna apart. And Senna lost his temper with him.
Is that when Senna said, didn't call him Jackie, he said Stewart.
Yes.
Stuart, if you don't go for a gap, you are no longer a racing driver. That's the interview with Jackie?
That's it. So I then had to follow Jackie Stewart, who did it immeasurably better than I would have done anyway, with an outraged Senna. But he'd simmered. And to be perfectly honest with you, I hadn't got the guts to do it a second time. So the answer is no. But it was... Now, don't use the word tragedy, the BBC say. Senna's death at Imola was a tragedy. As you pointed out, we had Rubens Barrichello having a nigh unto death crash on the Friday. We had Roland Ratzenberger being killed on Saturday, so when the race started at Imola, at San Marino, and I just tried to remember who it was that went into the back of JJ Leto. Martin?
Pedro Lamy, maybe?
Pardon?
Was it Pedro Lamy?
Yes, it was Pedro Lamy, that's right.
At the start?
Yeah, at the start, as a result of which the safety car came out. Now, with all the wisdom of hindsight, they should have stopped the race, not bring the safety car out. And the safety car in those days was not a specially souped-up Mercedes-Benz driven by a highly talented driver, as it is now. It was whatever was around, like a Fiat Punto, driven by somebody who got some talent, but the Formula One cars were trundling round for several laps while they cleared up the debris, and as a result of which the tyre temperatures went down, as a result of which the ride height went down of the cars. They were closer to the ground. When the race started, again with Schumacher and Senna vying for the lead, Senna went off. And my first reaction, Tom, was, wow, that's a big one, which sounds pretty casual. But I said that because I had seen on other years, at exactly the same corner, the Tamburello, Michele Alboreto go off and was all right. Nelson Piquet go off, hurt his foot, but he was all right. Gerhard Berger not only go off, but to be in the car with it on fire. And I was thinking, I'm talking about someone who's been done to a crisp before our very eyes. They got him out. So my first instinctive reaction, I think, was it hasn't been too bad in the past. It probably won't be too bad now. But then I rapidly realised when Professor Sid Watkins, the FIA's medical chap, who was absolutely brilliant, came out, the race was stopped, the body language was very ominous. And I didn't know what was happening because I was in the commentary box and there wasn't anybody to tell me. I had pictures from Rai, the Italian television company, coming into the box, but which were not the nicest and wouldn't have been shown by the BBC. But literally for the first time, the BBC had got its own camera unit there. So Mark Wilkin, the producer, was able to cut away to less worrying pictures. But I had to walk the tightrope between, don't worry folks, it'll be all right. I've seen 3 others go off at the same point and they were perfectly all right. He'll soon be back. And, oh dear, I fear this is terminal. You don't say that sort of thing. Somehow or other, you have to find the words to walk that tightrope between the two. And then he was taken away in the helicopter and the race was started. But the atmosphere of gloom and misery at what many people regard as the greatest driver of all time, almost certainly being about to die and subsequently doing so, was immeasurable.
Let's move on to some other topics now, I think. Favourite race over your career?
Australia. I love Australia.
Adelaide or Melbourne?
Adelaide, actually. It's difficult to put a cigarette paper between them, but Adelaide is smaller. I'm not going to say friendlier, because Melbourne was very friendly too. But it was the indefinable difference between the Formula One race being everything to Adelaide and the Formula One race subconsciously being another major sporting confrontation in Melbourne, with tennis and lots of other things against it. But either venue was absolutely brilliant, and I love the Australians, I love the country, I love the food, I love the whole attitude about the place. My wife, who lived there and was educated there, says it's all very well for you because you've only been there when you have been the chap that talked to them about the Formula One that they were passionately interested in, and they made a gigantic fuss of you. You haven't been there in an Australian summer when the temperatures are 45 degrees and not at all pleasant. And she was perfectly right. But who cares? I mean, I still think it's fabulous.
Bonza. Would you consider yourself to be a tech-savvy person? I'm not particularly, and luckily, we've got a great team of people at F1 that do amazing work on our website, and that's the topic that I want to talk to you about now. If you're looking to create a professional website by yourself, perhaps for your own business, or perhaps you want to breathe new life into your existing website, then look no further than Wix. Wix is the most technologically advanced website building platform available, allowing you the option to either start your website from scratch or choose from over 500 stunning templates, so you have the freedom of complete creative control over your own website. 140 million people use Wix for their websites. So if you're looking to branch out or build your brand online, then it's a good place to start. All sites include built-in SEO tools, so you can boost visibility of your website and get found online in search engines like Google and Bing. And if you need a little help on that front, then you can use Wix's SEO Whiz for a personalized plan. And you can get started now by going to wix.com. That's Wix, wix.com/podcast to get 10% off. Write it down, wix.com/podcast to get 10% off. Got that? Right, let's get back to Murray. Is there a favourite season that you reflect on, where the racing you enjoyed the most?
82. It's got to be 82. No, just a minute. It hasn't got to be 82. 76 takes a hell of a lot of beating.
James.
76 was the James Hunt year, of course, when he won in Spain and then got disqualified because the rear wing was 1/8 of an inch or something too wide. And then
Murray, your memory is pin sharp. You're 95 years old and you can remember all these things like it was yesterday.
And then he won the British Grand Prix after it had been stopped, and the crowd made such a fuss that they had to restart the race or risk a riot. I was doing the BBC radio pit lane interviewing, and James came rushing past me on his way from getting out of the car back to the pits, and I tried to stop him to do an interview, very stupid thing to do, actually. And he says, "Oh, there's a race on, old boy. There's a race on." And got in the refixed car that Alistair Caldwell and his mates at Marlborough had managed to do while keeping the FIA officials occupied by making protests and generally being difficult to give themselves time. And then James won the British Grand Prix, only to have that disallowed. And then you had the Niki Lauda crash at the Nürburgring, which ended his career with Ferrari and very nearly ended his life. And finally you had the incredible situation at Monza. No, not finally, almost finally, where Lauda came back almost literally from the dead and finished well in the points in a blood-soaked crash helmet, and then drove in the race that was going to decide the championship, the last race of the year in Japan at Fuji. The weather conditions were so appalling that he had the guts, the courage to pull out of the race and say, "My life matters more than the championship." And James won, and it was another dramatic situation where he got a puncture and had to come in. Anyway, 1976 was a hell of a year. But then
and as you said earlier, Murray, it seems that 76 was so integral in persuading the BBC to take the sport.
Yeah, it was
pivotal in so many ways.
It was because it was such a wonderful year, and because it was James, and because he was British, the public suddenly became aware of Formula One, really aware of Formula One, and the BBC started to televise it, and it was because the BBC started to televise it that Formula One became as popular worldwide as it did. It has.
I'm interested that when I posed that question, you immediately came back and said 82. Of course, Keke Rosberg's championship, but tragedy as well with Gilles Villeneuve's death and Didier Pironi as well having a bad accident in the Ferrari. What was it about 82 that stood out?
Monaco. When we had, I think, 4 different drivers leading in the last couple of laps, because first of all Alain Prost was leading and crashed out. Then his place was taken by Riccardo Patrese as in the closing stage, and I mean the last lap but one. Riccardo Patrese in the Brabham, who lost it on the way down to the hairpin, and then Didier Pironi took over in the Ferrari, only to, I can't remember whether it was a petrol starvation or an electrical fault, but his car stopped in the tunnel. So briefly, believe it or not, Andrea de Cesaris was in the lead, and then he retired.
The race that no one wanted to win, wasn't it?
Wonder of wonder, Derek Daly in the Williams is now leading, and he lost a rear wing at the Rascasse, I think. And meantime, Riccardo Patrese had regained and won the race. And there's never been a race like that before.
It was extraordinary, definitely. Now, the favourite race you said was Adelaide, but what about a favourite circuit?
Favourite circuit, I think, I'm hard put, but I think it has to be Spa. Partly for personal, emotional reasons. My father raced in the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa with great success. And that was at a time, of course, when it was the really long circuit, not the shorter one that they have now for safety reasons. But Spa in the Ardennes is still, even though it's been shortened, a brilliant circuit, almost a public road circuit, in glorious surroundings. The Belgians have the best food in Europe.
Chips.
And it's almost invariably a thumping good race. I mean, it's the race that Damon Hill won for Jordan to prove that he could win a race in more than one, for more than one constructor. Although he damn nearly won for Arrows.
One there for Williams as well. Do you remember, weren't you in the Ardennes in the war as well?
Yes, I was. I was in a tank regiment, as I think I said earlier on. And, it was the Battle of the Bulge, where Hitler's last despairing throw was to chuck the whole of the weight of the Western Wehrmacht against Britain and try to get through to the Channel coast, as they had done in Dunkirk years earlier. We were a reserve regiment waiting to go in, but the Americans did an absolutely brilliant job. There was a general called General McAuliffe, Nuts McAuliffe, they used to use him because they thought he was nuts. And the Germans had him in an impossible situation, and they demanded his retirement. Surrender, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. Nuts, he said. And the Americans managed to bring up reinforcements and won, and that was basically the end of the beginning as far as Hitler and the German Wehrmacht were concerned on the Western Front.
And that was all around near Spa.
From then on, we broke through, and I had an absolutely unbelievable experience of driving across Germany, chasing the retreating German army, and being instructed by the 21st Army Group. We were the lead regiment of the British Army, and we had instructions to get to Lübeck before the Russians, because Lübeck on the east coast of the Schleswig-Holstein Peninsula controlled the access to Denmark, Finland, Sweden and Norway, and whoever got there first was going to be in a strong position. We did an 80-mile march in the last day, which in a tank is unbelievable. And we linked up with the Russians. We were the first British unit in the army to do so. And the first Russians we saw were 3 of them on a German captured BMW motorcycle outfit with a squaddy at the handlebars, an officer on the pillion, and a Russian woman soldier in the sidecar. And we did all the fraternising bit, thumbs up, and they were saying, Lübeck, Lübeck. And we were saying, oh, we're in Lübeck, mate. We're there first. Up yours.
And you like that, how funny that it was a motorcycle as well, your first passion as well.
Yeah.
Keeps coming back to that, doesn't it? Final thoughts, just on sort of the big picture of Formula One. Is there a favourite team that you've enjoyed watching, fraternising with, people you knew, people you respected? Is there a favourite team?
Yes. Williams. What a romantic story that is. Hopefully not with a sad ending. But I saw Williams from when Frank Williams and Piers Courage were a one-car team, and then Frank went with De Tomaso and subsequently founded his own team, got Patrick Head aboard, built this incredible organisation as a private owner that won so many world championships for drivers and constructors, only to fall on the hard times that they're in now. And I hope and pray that they're going to be able to fight their way out of it, but it's going to be terribly difficult against the moneyed might of Mercedes-Benz and Ferrari and Red Bull, and to a lesser extent Renault, and even some of the others. But there have been some wonderful times. Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, Keke Rosberg, David Coulthard and all the rest of them driving for Williams, not the least of whom, of course, was Ayrton Senna and Damon Hill. So that's my answer, Williams, and God be with them, and I hope they manage to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
What does the next 1,000 races hold for Formula One? What would you like? Which direction would you like to see the sport
It's going to change, Tom. I'm not sure about in what direction it's going to change, because when I started, the driver had the engine in front of him. He was wearing cotton overalls and a skull cap. There were no runoff areas. There was no Armco. The medical facilities were minimal. And the whole of the top half of the driver stuck out of the top of the car. Look at it now. They drive around in safety cells with lots of Armco, with runoff areas, with brilliant medical facilities, with halos and all the rest of it. Thank heavens. Now the first question is it still going to be an internal combustion engine, or is it going to be electricity? I find it very difficult to generate any enthusiasm about Formula E, to be honest, because great part of the attraction of Formula One is the noise. And to hear something whining past you is not the same as hearing a full-blooded V12, or even, as they are now, a turbocharged engine. So it's going to change, and I don't know in what direction it's going to change, whether it will continue as some sort of internal combustion formula, or whether it will become electrical. If it becomes electrical, I think I have lived through the best of it.
Well, Murray, what a fascinating chat. Thank you very much. What an eclectic and amazing life you've lived.
Nice to talk to you, Tom, and if I may return the praise, I remember vividly when in my ham-fisted unfamiliarity with modern digital techniques, I used to write my race stories, and because I was incompetent enough to send them back to HQ electronically, you used to type them up for me and send them through, and I have never, ever forgotten that, and I have forever been grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Well, Murray, that's very kind. My typing is really not that good.
It was good enough.
Murray, we've had a lot of fun over the years. Now, I thought, just as an out, for the young uns listening to this, they have missed out by not listening to you call the start of a race. Is there any chance, just as we leave this podcast, you could say, and it's over to you, Murray.
So watch the lights. It's 5 lights, 4 lights, 3 lights, 2 lights, 1 light. Let's go, go, go.
And I'll go. Murray, thank you very much. Unless I'm very much mistaken, that was the legend that is Murray Walker. It was such a privilege to spend time with him and to see him looking so well. After we'd finished the recording, we went to the pub for lunch and he regaled me with more stories from his long and very full life. And that voice, I don't know about you, but I got goosebumps as he launched into commentary mode at the end. Murray, thanks for your time, and I hope we'll see you at a racetrack again soon. And finally, here's the moment you've been waiting for. The final 5, the lucky listeners who will be receiving a shiny pair of Bose QC35-2 wireless headphones. Thanks to Noshi, who said, if F1 runs in your blood, you should be listening to F1 Beyond the Grid. This podcast keeps on giving. Thanks, Noshi. Andrew Morris was kind enough to say, thanks for another excellent podcast. I've spent the last month listening to all the F1 Beyond the Grids while travelling to work. Loving the insight into Formula One history and the environment, especially the episode with DC. Gary Honey messaged us wondering what content has been edited due to time constraints. Well, that will have to be our little secret, I'm afraid, Gary. And thank you to Gino Lupini for allowing us to keep you company on the train to work, and for your note. I've just finished the F1 Beyond the Grid back catalogue, he says. finishing with the amazing life of Luca di Montezemolo. What a passionate and emotional man, a true hot-blooded Italian. Yes, indeed, Gino. And finally, Hannah Collins, who wrote in saying, I'm not a Schumacher fan, and then Team Villeneuve in brackets in 97. But it was a fascinating insight into a clearly private man. I love this podcast. Tom Clarkson F1 does a great job. That's very kind of you, Hannah. Very kind indeed. Keep talking to us using the F1 Beyond the Grid hashtag or tweet me at Tom Clarkson F1. Thanks again to each and every one of you for your support so far. Well, that's it for now. All that remains is for me to say, if you haven't already subscribed to Beyond the Grid, why not do so now so you never miss an episode? We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and tons of other podcast platforms. See you next week for another chat with a big name from the world of F1. Beyond the Grid is produced by F1 in association with Audio Boom. Until next time, keep it flat out.